Hey, I'm Mr. Alger, one of our social workers here. And so today, for this Nice Way lesson, I want to do something a little different. I will be talking at the camera a lot, and we'll see how that goes. But I want to spend some of the time sharing with you about what it is that helps us to be happy, and kind of what science says, what science might offer us in terms of happiness and happiness research. So basically, Dr. Laurie Santos, who is a professor at Yale, designed a course called The Science of Well-Being. And so there's a lot of cool stuff in that class. It's available free online at Coursera, and you can take it if you're interested. But just a few things I want to share with you kind of from that class, which is actually the most popular undergraduate course at Yale. And so what we find when we look at happiness is that most of us are not good predictors about what's actually going to make us happy. And so basically we can go around and we can ask people, what are the 5 things that you think are most likely to contribute to your overall happiness? And so in a second, we're going to look up here and see what are those 5 things. What do we expect is going to make us happy? But as I'm kind of indicating, these 5 things are all wrong, and we'll kind of touch on why that is. All right, so hopefully you can see this kind of list of 5 things behind me on this kind of small whiteboard. But so when we ask people, we get good job. Usually that means for most people a job that's going to pay us a lot of money. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Lots of money, just money itself is going to help us to be happy, most people would think. Awesome stuff, right? Maybe that bright, shiny new car, a perfect body, and perfect grades, right? People pushing for perfection, I think a lot of us may recognize is not the best way to seek out happiness. So in short, this is an important list to keep in mind, that these are not things that are actually going to help us to build our happiness. But let's look at maybe why that is. And so we don't have time to go over each of these factors, but money is a good one for us to think about. And partially, everybody knows kind of our relation to money. We can understand this one pretty easily. And there's just a lot of research around money and how money contributes to happiness, both around our local area and in the United States, and really around the world. And so what we find with money is that when people don't have enough, if you don't have enough money to pay bills and to pay for some of those basic necessities, if you can't put food on the table and a roof over your head, those are very important things that bring a lot of stress and difficulty to a person or to a family. Those limitations impact happiness a lot. But once we have enough money, once we can pay for those necessities, and we have food on the table and a roof over our heads and a car to get us to work and can pay for health care and things like that can sometimes add up to a lot of money, we don't need a lot extra. It doesn't matter what kind of car we're able to drive or those other kinds of things that money might buy us. They don't actually contribute to happiness, certainly not in the long run. And that's just an important thing to kind of keep in mind, and hopefully it gives you a better understanding of happiness around that one area. Also touching on the idea of a good job, right? I'd mentioned most people are going to think a good job is basically defined by how much financial success it can bring us. How much is that person paid, or maybe how prestigious that kind of career is. But when we do think about a good job, there are 2 factors we do want to keep in mind, things that actually do relate a lot to happiness. And so 1, we want a job that's going to build on and utilize what are called our character strengths. We'll talk about that more in a second. And 2, we want a job that enables a state of mind called flow, where basically we are fully focused on the task at hand. And so for that first item, when we think about our character strengths, I'm going to encourage our students to check out something that our staff did. This is the High 5 test. And so the High 5 test is at high5test.com. 5 is written out as a numeral, not as the word, but otherwise it's high5test.com. It's a free 100-item survey where you are just kind of using a slider to rate how much you identify with each of those 100 statements. At the end, they're going to shoot out one of 34 different character strengths that through the research is shown to kind of be a good determining factor for those kinds of things that we want to use and we want to build on. It's not like you're good at math or you're really good at this one thing, but it's about our character, about more of who we are and these kind of broad categories. It's a free survey. It'll take you about 10 or 15 minutes, so you're not going to have time for it right now, but I would encourage a lot of students to kind of check it out if that's something you're curious about and to think of how you could build on some of that stuff. So in flow, which I'd also mention, is something that we'd hope to talk about more in maybe a future Nice Way lesson like this, depending on how this kind of lesson is received. And there's also a TED Talk on it that's going to be part of a Google Drive folder that your teachers would be able to access for you guys at another time, or they can share the link with you. But for now, really, in terms of flow, think about that state of total immersion in some kind of activity where time ceases to exist, kind of everything else disappears, and we're just fully engaged in that present moment in that one thing that we're doing. So in last, I want to look at our prediction about good grades, or about the search for perfect grades. And most of you can imagine, either in yourselves or in a friend, somebody who has been really stressed out trying to get perfect grades. When that B comes back on a test, they're kind of freaking out. And, you know, if we think back to early childhood experiences with school, or just some of the kids that we might know in our family or our neighborhood, children are naturally curious. They want to learn. And when we focus on grades, we're replacing that desire to learn with a desire to get good grades. We find really that the more that we can focus on the process and desire for learning and less on those letter grades, that we're actually happier and more fulfilled. So you've heard the advice of just do your best, learn from your mistakes. And what I'm trying to say here is that really if we're doing those things, we are then focusing on the process. And when we focus on these things, we're happier. It's not about the letter grades you get, but if you're actually focusing on the process and you're kind of taking care of that love of learning, what we do find is that people are spending more time on their studies and ultimately are getting better grades. So again, it's not about those grades, but if we focus on the process, we actually do better. So just do yourself a favor, try your best, try to learn from mistakes. Each day you wake up, bring your best self to school, to your friends, to your different activities. And so we might be moving pretty quickly, but this is kind of this list that I'm going to now get rid of, because I want to introduce to you those 5 things which actually will help to build happiness, what science says. And again, maybe we're not good predictors, but science here can be our guide. All right, okay. So here are the 5 big things that science says actually will contribute to happiness. So here we have kindness, social connection, time affluence, mind control, and healthy practices. And so for this first part of this kind of 2-part video series, we're just going to touch on kindness. We'll talk a little bit more about that to give you a better idea of how kindness and being kind contributes to our happiness. Those next 4 pieces, some of which you may not even know exactly what we're talking about, you'll see in part 2. So kindness. I want us all to recognize, we know we feel better when people are nice to us. And it's good. It's something that we encourage around the school, right? We want each other to be nice. But it's not just that somebody being nice to us is going to impact our happiness, but there's a lot of cool research around how when we're nice to others, we feel happier as well. And I've talked about at different points kind of what science says, right? Even these are the 5 factors that science tells us are going to make us happier. But so looking at this particular, kind of one particular study around kindness, I think we get an idea, hopefully, of what I'm talking about. So there's one particular study I want to share with everybody. And so this was done by a group of researchers led by somebody with the last name Dunn, D-U-N-N. The study was around 2008. And so what basically happened is this researcher went to college campuses and went around and gave people money. So, and there were 2 experimental conditions in terms of how much money was given. So the researchers either gave $5 or $20 to just people walking around campus. And then that person who received the money was told either to spend the money on themselves or to spend that money on somebody else, someone of their choosing. And they also asked everybody who they gave money to, what do you think would make you the happiest? If I gave you $5, would $20 have made you happier? Or if I told you to spend the money on yourself or on someone else, which of those would make you happier? And so, as most of us, I think, would guess, just kind of intuitively, we would think that $20 would be probably 4 times better than 5, and that if we had that money to spend on ourselves, we would be the happiest. But what researchers actually found was that if we spent that money, it really didn't matter how much we were spending, $5, $20, there wasn't a significant difference between those. But there was a big difference between on whether we spent that money on ourselves or on somebody else. And they found that we're much happier if we actually spent that money on someone else, which, again, kind of thinking intuitively sounds just strange. But what that's really telling us is that there's a lot of added benefit to us being kind to others, that it helps us to feel better and happier about ourselves. And so that's just kind of one small piece of some of the research around happiness. But what I really want to encourage people kind of at the end of this video is just be kind to others. It helps our school culture. It is going to help other people to feel good. But most importantly, be selfish. You want to be happy, be kind to others. And in the next video, we'll talk about the other 4 parts of kind of what science says is going to help us be happy. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of first part of the series and hope to see you for the next one. Thanks.